Gypsy Rose is finally out, and the internet is becoming divided on what they think about her and her newfound fame. I watched her recent docuseries, all of it yesterday, and we're going to talk about it in today's video. Hello, Sofa Squad, and welcome back to the old sofa. It's back there. Roscoe's on it. He's sleeping. My name's Paul. I'm in front of it. I'm talking. So, y'all, today we are going to be visiting the highly requested, much talked about Gypsy Rose case. And specifically, we're going to start kind of, not at the beginning of it, but with the things that she's out there doing publicity for and whatnot, and specifically her docu-series, Prison Confessions from Gypsy Rose Blanchard. We're going to talk about that. And what I'm doing with this, because so many people have emailed me over this, and thank you for doing so, but I've just been like sitting back and waiting and taking it in, but it just keeps going and growing and going and growing, this like famous or infamy, whatever you want to call it, with her. So I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna start and I want to hear from her directly. So we're starting with this docu-series. She has a book, we'll go to that next, then we'll look at some interviews and stuff like that, but those are different videos. So what we're gonna do for this video specifically is I'm gonna be reading notes from my phone. I literally sat here, watched 1 through 6, and made notes along the way. I will read those and I will make commentary throughout. So again, this is gonna be heavy on the talking and commentary, less on clips. In fact, there's no clips except pictures and stuff like that that will be displayed. And so that's kind of the style of the video. As I always say, please remember, I ain't fancy, I ain't no lawyer, I ain't no credentialed professional cop or nothing like that. I'm just a guy with a sofa and a dog and opinions on these cases and documentaries that we watch. So it's just that, keep that in mind, please. And that being said, before we do jump into that little quick overview, if you want to follow Roscoe and I over on the Instagram, it's on the screen, it's in the description. Go on and give it a follow. And now also keep in mind that I'm going to be doing a live stream and talking about this as well. I do this on my podcast channel. The link is down in the description if you want to sign up for that. So there's that. Let's go ahead and get into that little quick overview. So Gypsy Rose was believed to be a girl plagued by numerous health conditions. Her mother, Dee Dee Blanchard, used this to gain sympathy, attention, money, houses, and numerous free stuff. It was her grift. But all was not as it seemed. One day, a Facebook message appeared on their shared account saying, "The bee is dead." Now, this fueled an investigation. Police, cops, they end up at Gypsy's home, at which point they find Dee Dee Blanchard has viciously lost her life, and Gypsy is nowhere to be found. Her wheelchair's there, her med's there. And remember, at this time, everybody thought that she was, had, a very short expiration date on life. She was wheelchair bound, all this stuff. However, very soon thereafter, Gypsy is located at her boyfriend's house, Nick. And to the nation's surprise, especially of the locals that kind of knew her very personally, she's able to walk, talk, just like a regular old person. So 2015, Gypsy Rose Blanchard was arrested for the M of her mother, along with her boyfriend / co-defendant, Nick, who would claim, they both would, she enlisted him to help take out the mother. Nick did the actual act of it, but we'll talk about that because that's up for debate too with some people. And in 2016, she pled guilty to second-degree M. She got a very sweet deal for 10 years, the very lowest you can get for that. So since then, numerous documentaries and TV shows have come out about her. One being semi-recent, it was incredibly well done, but not 100% accurate, but it was called The Act. That was amazing. The actresses in there were just awesome. Gypsy served nearly 7 years of her sentence, and then she went up for parole, and she was granted parole and got out early. This is very recent, December 28, 2023. So for the last 18 months of her sentence, producers were following her around. They interviewed Gypsy by phone, by person, and this resulted in a 6-part docuseries titled The Prison Confessions of Gypsy Rose Blanchard. Okay, so that's where we're at now. That's the quick overview. Obviously, there's tons more to go into, which we'll learn more details as we go through this. So what we're going to do is, again, I'm just going to refer to my notes and things that I made note of that I thought were worthy of talking about and go over those. So it starts off 24 hours before parole. Now, you know how these things go. They drag it out, right? Over 6 series, right? But literally, that's what they're claiming this to be. So she's nervous. She describes the abuse her mother inflicted, and she said she began to feel like it was a her or me type situation. Now, she said that her end goal from when she was incarcerated was to do everything in that facility possible to get that early parole. She only had that one parole hearing, and that was it. She gets that or she serves the 10 years. So it's like everything's on the line there, okay? So they open up and they let you know this, like there's a lot at stake, this, that, and the other. She's nervous. For the first time, really, because because we've seen interviews, we've seen this and that, but we haven't seen Gypsy just up here telling her story, watching her interact and talk and all this stuff for this amount of time. So this part was very intriguing to me. Okay, so Christy Blanchard, this is her stepmom, she's interviewed. And she says Gypsy doesn't remember not being under lock and key by Dee Dee. Like, that's all the life that she knew. Gypsy had never heard of Munchausen by proxy, Gypsy says. And this is what the mother had. It's named a different thing now, but this is what Gypsy was a victim of. And then they interview Rod Blanchard, her dad. Now that Dee Dee is gone, he says, he has a fresh start with Gypsy. And Gypsy says her mom taught her to lie and manipulate, but that's not her. Now, this is one thing that I'm seeing come up a lot, is where people, the ebbs are starting to turn on the internet and social media, as it always does with things. And this is one thing I worry about with this case. And people are trying to be like, well, hold on, wait a minute. She's a manipulator. She's this, she's that. You know, at the end of the day, look at her origins. Okay, now I'm not saying right, wrong, or indifferent for her, but she herself says this is what she saw. This is what she knew. And I believe the words that I might even make this the title of the video. She was bound to her mother by this lie, which was so powerful because it's true. And they have therapists on the show who are talking and describing what victims of Munchausen, I say that word wrong, I'm sorry, by proxy go through, and how there's essentially, they are also protecting the person doing this to them, because oftentimes they're at their whim, they're at their mercy. And in this particular case, you know, with Gypsy, she didn't know what her mother would do if she spoke out. They asked, do you think she loved you? And Gypsy says, I think she loved me in her own way, she says. And that as a child, she thinks that her mom loved her, but not when she grew up. And, you know, if you look back at the things we've seen of Gypsy, you know, and it's a little bit of childlike stuff mixed in with my child has cancer, so we're putting the soft things on her head and whatnot. But she was always eternally youthful. And I do think that Dee Dee seemed to have this obsession with keeping her like a little baby, and especially keeping her dependent on her. She says she's still learning so much about what happened to her from other people because her mom kept so much from her. This is understandable. The dad says he was 17 years old when he was dating Dee Dee Blanchard, who said she was 21, but really she was 23 years old. This is very heavy for me. So she's 23 years old and going out with a 17-year-old and lying about her age. Wow. So you see where this behavior, I mean, this is, you know, from the get-go, it seems. They'd only been dating 3 months when she told him that she was pregnant with Gypsy. Gypsy said that the most devastating failure to her mother was losing her father, because they did separate, and that her mother blamed her for losing the father because she wasn't the son he wanted. Now that's major, right? Now the dad says when Gypsy was just a tiny little newborn, the Dee Dee had her tested because she was having trouble sleeping, and turns out she had sleep apnea, basically. Now another thing to keep in mind is during this, the father will say about the divorce, is that he basically came to Dee Dee and was like, you know what? I'm not in love with you, basically. Now we can see her behavior that she had while she was alive with, you know, Gypsy, and just imagine, you know, some of that behavior that probably played out in a relationship. And she seems to have just focused all of that on Gypsy after this, both the wrath of it and then, you know, just being like, Gypsy's my only person, if that makes sense. So Claude Petrie, Dee Dee's father, is interviewed and says after the divorce, Dee Dee moved back home and says that Gypsy had a machine and the alarm would come on when she would stop breathing. So this part sounds like it might have been legitimate. They talked to Gypsy's pediatrician that says Dee Dee can never produce Gypsy's previous medical records, but now they're showing them to him for the first time. And of course, it's vast. And he says if he saw the things probably would have been much different. Now, one thing to keep in mind is, first of all, number one, side note, the structure of things. It might sound like I'm jumping from thing to thing, but I'm literally just making notes as what they show on TV happens. And so you know how documentaries are, where they jump from this person to that person to this person. So that's why you're hearing like, well, we're talking to the grandfather and then this and then this. This is a series of interviews that they put together to tell the story. Now, that being said, also keep in mind, and we'll get deeper into this, that this pediatrician that was up there, you know, Dee Dee played doctors off of each other, and she used Hurricane Katrina, to her benefit when going to a new place to be like, don't have any of these medical records. You know, she was able to do this, and oftentimes people who are manipulating doctors, especially to this degree, this is their MO, this is what they do. Now the doctor says that the issue with Gypsy's eye was something that did require surgery or she would go blind, and he suggested this might have been where the Munchausen by proxy came about. So there were some legitimate health concerns with with Gypsy that could have triggered this behavior behavior. But also when I was watching it, I had the feeling of, imagine if she started getting that taste of, oh, this is what it's like when your child is sick or injured. This is the attention you get. I've never gotten this before. I like this feeling. Ellis Pierre, Gypsy's uncle, speaks and says Dee Dee would look up diseases and be like, maybe she has this. So you see where this origins are happening, right? Now, it was time for Gypsy to start school, and Gypsy's stepmom says that she doesn't even think she was able to make it a year before Dee Dee pulled her out and told her that she pulled her out because she was afraid that they wouldn't give her medication correctly. Dee Dee homeschooled her, but that never really happened. So again, you're hearing from the various family members of like, okay, this is our viewpoint. Because one thing that people have, I see like in the comment sections and people's content talking about this case, this situation, is that they're like, well, why didn't she reach out to so-and-so and so-and-so? And you kind of get the answers to this during this. And we'll get more into my opinions because it's very complex about that whole question of, did she do the right thing? Or, was this the only way out of the situation and whatnot, right? Because I have various feelings on that. But obviously I didn't live through it. So you're hearing this from everybody. So this right here, you see the control. And how many cases have we watched recently where the parents yank the kids and homeschool them and it does not end well, right? We're seeing this exactly play out here. Now also, Gypsy recounts getting in a motorcycle wreck on her grandfather's motorcycle. Clearly it wasn't, a death-defying one, but she scraped her knee and leg on it or whatever. And she was like, my mom made such a huge deal out of this, way more than it was. And she says that her knee and leg had gotten scraped, but her mother had her in a brace, which then escalated to Dee Dee making her use the wheelchair. So right there, you see how this went from this to this. Gypsy says her mom was her best friend and she trusted her, so she didn't question her. And this is one thing that I was having to remind myself watching this, even though, again, I have very hypocritical opinions on this case and the actions of Gypsy while watching this, because, and we'll get to it, but it'll come out as we talk, because there's this aspect where, remember back to being a kid, you believe and trust everything your parents say at a certain age, right? You're not questioning it. They are the end all be all to you. So if your parents like, no, you've scraped your knee, you have to use this wheelchair, there's just this level of, well, okay, I mean, I might kind of know I don't need it, but here's this. So if that's all you know for X amount of years, I can't put myself how one would view the world, because the world that you know is literally an illusion of lies that your parent has constructed, that you're questioning, like, well, my legs can work, once she gets older and whatnot. So I just find this fascinating to see how this cloud storm, the perfect storm formed in this. Now, Gypsy said there's a lot of emotional abuse along with medical abuse. Gypsy says when she first entered prison, everything was fun to her. It was the most freedom she ever had. She reminds the audience that when she was young, her mother controlled every single thing about her body. And she'll go into this more and talk about like the first day going out rec yard. Oh, please. She didn't want to leave. I mean, she was like, this is wild. And to hear that coming from her, it lets you know how entrapped she was under Dee Dee's lock and key. So I found that heartbreaking, but interesting as well. So Bobby, who is Gypsy's cousin, speaks. He says they all knew the wheelchair stuff was BS. Now again, they see this kind of stuff going on, but also remember that Dee Dee was good at hiding her, at moving around, at doing all this kind of crazy stuff and keeping people blurry. Gypsy says she was fully aware she could walk, but she was afraid of losing her mother's affection. So that right there tells me so much, because again, remember, your parent is your person, and in this thing, Gypsy isolated her to where it was the only person. Gypsy said that when she would do things her mother didn't like, her mother would then like favor the cat. She would give the cat praise and love the cat and then look at Gypsy with a snarl. So this is the demented world that Gypsy's living in. If I don't do what mom likes, she distances herself, and this will get more severe as we go on through the years. So a family member cites an example of one time where there was a party. There's a trampoline, and when Dee Dee left, Gypsy is like, can I jump on it? And they're like, sure. So they let her up there, and she was jumping and having a good time. But as soon as she saw her mother return, she dropped down like she couldn't walk, and then her mother got super mad at everyone and was like, she's crippled, don't you know that? The stepmom and dad recount how they tried to be more involved with Gypsy, but the mother kept them from it. She cited an example where she would ask Gypsy, what do you want for your birthday or Christmas? And Gypsy would be like, I just want love. But then Dee Dee would get on the phone and give off a list of all these fancy things. So if you watch the act, if you remember, there's a scene at a party where the mother leaves and Dee Dee eats cake, and then the mother comes back and everybody's like, I thought you couldn't eat cake or whatever. She's like, no, I can. And the mom comes back and immediately gives her an injection and rushes her to the hospital and makes this huge ordeal. Well, this is the same type. I mean, this is like, okay, probably what really happened in the show, fictionalized it. It wasn't meant to be exact, recount. But can you imagine as a family member being like, what's going on, right? And then you hear the next thing, stepmom and dad being like, we try to get involved, but she keeps us from us. And, Gypsy seemed to be more regular, like, you don't have to send me anything. But yet here's the mom. Oh, we need Disney this, Disney that, Disney this. The mom was a grifter. She was a con artist of the nth degree. After Dee Dee's mom passed, she became more devious. Family members said that she bounced around from projects to projects and she was wanted for writing bad checks. She ran up credit cards in her mother's name after she had been deceased for a while, and she basically started scheming and plotting. Now, who knows what came first and whatever, but you see all the line, the medical attention, and then bam, all the financial stuff. It's all colliding. Gypsy says the best memory of her life was the day she got to prison. She got to go out on the picnic tables and realize she was free. Now, if that's not sad, like your best memory is getting out there on these picnic tables and being like, oh my gosh. I mean, remember, towards the end, Dee Dee was keeping her chained up to the bed, right? I mean, this was like insane. I mean, not all the time, but I think for 2 weeks she said she chained her up. But, they have the windows drawn all the time. Dee Dee was getting desperate. She knew that Gypsy was over 18, and Gypsy was figuring all this stuff out. It was not going to end well. So for her, again, and she'll say this throughout, being like, I have these fond memories of being in prison. Now, obviously, at a certain point, you're going to want to get out and live your life, right? At one point in New Orleans, Dee Dee gets in a car wreck. Her foot's really badly injured, so the grandfather has to take Gypsy home and take care of her. While she's there, she eats normal, she plays normal, and she was really close with the grandpa, and then it all changed. Gypsy said she's been in trauma therapy in prison and likes it, and that was helpful for her. Gypsy also says she was being SA'd by her grandfather when she was living with him. He denies this though. He says she was the one trying to touch him, and he'd stop her. They tell Gypsy this, and she says she wants nothing to do with him. Her uncle says he doesn't think that happened and that it was something her mother put in her mind. So here's the thing. This is a very touchy situation here because so many things Dee Dee would create fictionally and convince Gypsy of them, but she seems very adamant about this. I don't know. I don't know what really happened, right? I mean, if we go on Gypsy's word, it's like, to me, why would she lie about that? What would be the motivation? I don't know why she would. It doesn't sound like something that she's like, no, well, my mom told me. It was like, no, this happened to me. I know. For him to say that didn't happen, she was trying to touch me, that part feels a little sus to me, right? The fact that he would even say that. But again, I don't know these people. I don't know if that's true or not, but if it is, my God, can you imagine, again, just all that she's been through and then that on top of it? But the uncle's like, I think Dee Dee put that in her mind, and we might not ever know, right? So who knows? Gypsy says her stepmom, Christy, is the mom she wished she always had, and throughout the docuseries, she will refer to her as mom, and I think that that's awesome. She can have that situation and be able to, reference someone as that, because even though she did love Dee Dee and they were close and they were connected in this very bizarre way, clearly it was a very unhealthy relationship. Gypsy at one point told her grandfather that when he was at work, Dee Dee would take Roundup and put in the food she was cooking for his wife. The wife would pass away. And this is very, other family members were like, yeah, I could see her doing that. She apparently had some kind of bad blood with this woman anyways. Very suspect. To me, again, was I there? No. Do I know them? No. But to me, it just seems on brand with something she would probably do. Look at the mushroom lady, right? Over in Australia, putting poisonous mushrooms in there to save the day. Dee Dee could have been doing numerous amounts of things to other people we'll never know. Now we're going to move on to episode 2. So Gypsy got her education in prison and she wants to show she's a survivor and can make it on her own. Gypsy said her mom told her dad was abusive to her, but she knows that never happened. And this is one of the things where she's like, but that never happened, and so on and so forth. And later on she'll talk to the father and say she wants to have some hard conversations to clear the air and decide what's normal and what's not normal and what was real and all this kind of stuff. But again, this is where you reference back to her comment about what her grandfather did to her, and she's so adamant, like, no, I know that happened. Well, here she's like, I don't think that happened. So you see the difference there. That's why I tend to believe what she's saying about it. I don't think that particular thing with the grandmother was just something that Dee Dee put in her mind, because she's clear to say that, yeah, this is something that mom kind of told me, so I don't really know. Anyways, Dee Dee's brother said she was his mom's favorite. He said that she had a heart murmur and his mother would protect her from doing things like she wouldn't let her go outside and play a lot, and he wonders if this is where she could have gotten the whole thing about getting sick and attention. Yes, somewhere along the line this triggered, and you're hearing all these events throughout this that you can be like, like, I bet something stuck with that. I bet something stuck with that. But there's numerous things in Dee Dee's life that make you kind of think that, so you can see how this probably ended up that way. Not that everybody who went through these same set of circumstances would be doing the same stuff. Gypsy says that she always felt like her mother cared about her, but then began to realize that her mom didn't teach her basic things about caring for herself. She never taught her about things, females do to take care of themselves and clean themselves and that time of the month and that kind of thing. When that time of the month would come, she would make Gypsy wear a diaper. And she said that even once she entered prison, she had no idea what a tampon was or what any of that stuff was. Somebody had to teach her. Let that sink in. I think she was, 18, 19, something like that. When she went in there, she had no concept her mother was making her wear a diaper. Okay, that's the level you're talking about here, the things that her mother was psychologically and physically doing to her. Now, Hurricane Katrina, we talked about this earlier, devastated their home, and they stay in a shelter for over a month and then get flighted out to Missouri. Gypsy was 14, but the mom was telling her she was 12. All throughout this, there's evidence of how the mother kept telling her she was younger than she really was. And this is what I'm talking about, where the mother would use Hurricane Katrina to her benefit to kind of, nobody knows her name, nobody knows her history, all the medical records were destroyed, you have to take my word on what my daughter has. So now this is during the doctor visits, as the next stuff is going to take place. And her mom would give signals to shut up and, do things like, to control her. She would squeeze her hand, she would put her arm around her shoulder, and she would tell her when they do the reflex test not to make, you cannot move your legs. You have to stay super still. So the mother was manipulating these moments. Now, once the move to Missouri happened, she says that medical records are all gone due to Katrina and becomes the sole source of medical information on Gypsy. Her pediatrician says he was very concerned about the cancer claims. Marcia Smith, a family friend who worked at Hospitality House for the hospital, she has letters from Gypsy and she really loved her. She says Dee Dee told them that the dad was out of the picture because he was a bad man. So during this whole time, the dad and stepmother are actually trying to find them, but they've disappeared with Katrina. They're gone. And so they're concerned that they had passed away or whatever. Now, again, we're going to get into some of the information about what the doctors say took place. Again, she's coming in here talking about my kid has leukemia, my kid has this, and these are major claims to make, right? That are going to make doctors say, we don't have medical records, so basically, we got to start over and start testing, and the truth will start to come out. The narration switches over to one of the pediatricians talking about how to assess Gypsy's medical situation with no records, and so they test her for all these cancers, and she doesn't have any. Also, they can't find any kind of muscle issues as to why she would be in a wheelchair, so they send her to a neurologist. The neurologist does a bunch of MRIs, and they all come back normal. He says he asked her to stand up, and she does not. Gypsy said she doesn't remember that happening. He says Dee Dee got super mad at him. He was already concerned about Munchausen by proxy, and he regrets not reporting. Now, this is the thing that's unfortunate, because this right here, Gypsy's like, I don't remember that. Well, I have no doubt that the doctor's not lying, right? He's like, look, there's nothing wrong with you. Stand up. Well, of course she's not going to want to. Now, they also have, like I've said before, a therapist and whatnot narrating aspects of this and making commentary, and they'll say that this is very normal for victims of this, to not want to upset the abuser, to go along with the lie and whatnot, especially when it's a child like this. They're going to want to please the parent and go along with things. So Gypsy knows she can't stand up, and it would be like, well, just stand up and do this. One thing at the center of this case is the fact that reaching out for help, but no one helps, and then the abuse gets worse. Now, Gypsy had her salivary glands removed, and this causes her teeth to have serious issues after the surgery. She's given pain medication and becomes addicted to pills. Now, I did not know this about this situation, about her pill addiction, and this will get interesting. She says when she goes to prison, she gets hooked on cigarettes, and she was still apparently addicted to pills in prison for a while, too. A shrink speaks with Gypsy, and he asked her what coping mechanisms there were for things, and she says the first couple of years she was in prison, she used drugs, and she tried Suboxone, and says it gave her the same high as taking pain pills. Gypsy says that at one point she owed a woman $50 who was basically coming for her for this money. And so Gypsy calls her stepmom and says that she broke the woman's CD player and asked her to send the $50. Eventually, Gypsy comes clean to Christy, the stepmother, and then she got clean and sober. Now, this was very, very big, because one thing that people have an issue with is she's a master manipulator, she's this and that. Well, I mean, clearly here we see her telling, yeah, look, I was doing drugs. I owed this person money. I schemed my stepmom, whatever, out of money, then came clean to her. My expectation of Gypsy is not that she's like this, oh, Dee Dee is removed, so she's this honest person. I expect her to have these pitfalls and these, like, whatever you call them, these things like this, because it's all she saw, it's all she knew, right? Now, I'm not saying right, wrong, or indifferent either, or like, oh, it's okay to have scammed you. No, absolutely not, right? But what I'm looking for is the wherewithal and the intelligence and the emotional intelligence to be like, oh, wait, I did this. That's not right. That's my mom. Let me make this right, okay? It's the kind of behavior I'm looking from her, and I don't think that that's going to end for a while. I don't think you could ever grow up for 18 whatever years under the care of somebody like Dee Dee and not for the rest of your life have to struggle with, lying or manipulating or things like this, because it would be ingrained in you, right? But the wherewithal to work on yourself when you see these things come up, to me, is the key element to look for. Okay, let's keep going. So they talk about Dee Dee's scams and specifically Habitat for Humanity. Remember, they got that house. The pediatrician speaks again, and he says that over time, nurses came to him with 3 different documents, and on each of them, she had a different birthday. And the doctor gets upset in the moment, and when asked why, he says he's reliving the emotions that he had during the moment of realization that something really bad is going on. You can only imagine as a caretaker, as a doctor, I mean, like this realization of, okay, there's already red flags with this. Now we're seeing this. Something really, really bad is going on. Now, this is a question that everybody wants to know that I've seen a lot of. So Gypsy's, going to the parole hearing in 24 hours, allegedly. And she's like, I know they're going to ask the question that everybody wants to. Why didn't you just stand up? Why didn't you say something? She said she'll have to be honest with them and tell them she was scared of her mother. Now, here's my thing. I completely believe that. And we're going back to why didn't she stand up at this moment or that moment or whatever. My whole thing is, how many times do we see these cases where CPS or Department of Family Social Services, all these stuff get involved and they do nothing, which they did at this point, although Gypsy helped pander the lie. You go to Neighbors and we'll hear from various people throughout this. Like, I don't know if I would have believed Gypsy because her mom had set it up that she had all these mental issues. Dee Dee had gone around and done all of this stuff to set things up so to infiltrate this circle so that if Gypsy did do that, people would question the validity of it. Shy of her getting up and being like, it's a miracle, and skipping away, right? Which she could have done, but again, other people, family members saw this and nothing ever came of it, right? Now, I'm not faulting them, but Dee Dee to me was this very evil, sinister, great manipulator of people. Look at the case, the Ruby Frankie thing we're doing with her, Jody Hildebrand. You hear from these victims, the grown victims, talking about she went to this organization, my job, this, she had them all thinking I was this. This is how these people operate. So I just keep that in mind as we go through this. Now, it switches back to the doctor. He talks about the switch birthdays and, the dates being switched and all that. So he calls DFS and he says that he's afraid that this child has been kidnapped, and so they do an investigation. And Gypsy said she remembers when they came to the house, and Gypsy says they separated her and her mom. They're like, do you have bruises? Do you have this? Is the mother really your mother? And they heard her in the other room. They heard her in the other room telling her mom to shut the F up. And Gypsy says that this time she was really close to her mom, and she believed that what her mom was doing for her was the best thing. And eventually they left and never followed up. So again, at this time she was like, I thought that my mom was doing what was best for me. I believed her. I trusted her. I loved her. That was my person. So I was going to lie to them to keep things up. And the way they acted, kind of like roughing the mother up and stuff, scared me. So I wanted these people gone. The pediatrician says he asked for Gypsy to be brought back in. And he point blank tells Dee Dee, I was the one that called the Department of Family Services. And he asked her to step out so that he can talk to Gypsy alone. And he basically asked Gypsy, do you need help? She's like, no, I love mom. She loves me. And says that even though she said that, he still didn't feel any better about the situation. Now, this played out in the act a couple of times where you're just like, oh my God, say something, say something. But again, as a kid, it's just that power of your parent overrides it. And again, I'm not trying to make a case for, everything she did was right in the way she handled it, because I don't feel that way. But I also am very much looking at what would this lens have been like through her eyes as a young person under the major care of her mother that controls everything and has created this false reality. Gypsy doesn't remember any of this and says her mom kept her on lockdown even more after this. And this is what I'm talking about. Gypsy knows. All she knows is, well, when people discover this, or if I say this, I go on lockdown even worse, because it was true. It's what her mother did. Dad calls on the 18th birthday to wish her a happy birthday. And the mom's like, no, you can't say that. Basically, she can't know that she's 18. She had Gypsy thinking she was 14, okay? Gypsy Gypsy says her mom got the Leukemia Society to gift her a laptop for Christmas. I mean, this is the level of grifting, right? Her mom thought she was looking at adolescent things like Disney and Barbie, but Gypsy says the first thing she did was make a Facebook account behind her mother's back and started talking to people. This is Dee Dee's downfall right here. Gypsy talks about meeting this first dude, I think his name was Ken, at some kind of sci-fi convention, and how the relationship was, how they would talk about movies and stuff, but there was also like this, sexually charged thing to it. Oh, she said that he was like, look, I'm on parole, and she was like, I didn't even know what that was at that time. I mean, remember, she's this like isolated person, right? She's 18, I think she's 14 years old, right? Dee Dee is shocked when she learns that Gypsy is like, I want to live as an independent woman. I want to find love. And she plans to try and run away with this dude. But her mother says you will never find love, and she ends up chaining her to the bed. So let's move on to episode 3. Gypsy says that her mother told her flat out that there's some things that she would never be able to do. And so Gypsy is very determined to get released, have her own car, her own place, her own money, to basically stand up on her own and take care of herself. And she says mom did everything. She cooked, she cleaned, and now she has this insecurity that she has to rely on everyone around her to do this stuff and do it correctly because she's just never done that. Now, I want to pause on this for a moment because I thought this was very interesting, and we'll bring it back up again throughout, because when you listen to some of the ways that Gypsy looks at herself, at least in this docuseries, in relation to the world and those around her, it is in this helpless type place a lot of times. Like, she'll speak of these men and be like, well, we got to the house and I was like, well, I moved from this situation to this. It's like in this who's going to take care of me way. Now, again, that's how she was raised. I mean, you heard her say mom did everything. I never did this stuff. So I didn't think I could do this stuff and do it right. So it's like that kind of helpless. I'm not faulting her for it, but it's also just another lens to look at this through, of how she comes at things and whatnot, and a mountain she'll have to climb to get over, because obviously the real world doesn't look or operate like that. There's this level, I think, that she's going to have this expectation of, oh, well, things just kind of happen, because mom was doing all these grifts. We got to meet who we wanted to meet, go where we wanted to go, got free this, got free that, and to come out of that and be like, oh, that's not reality. Because again, it's, well, we got all this stuff because mom told me I was dying of all these things. It's almost like a complete eye-opener, and another one of those reasons why I think incarceration was an excellent place for her, and she will even say this herself. They show a scene of her talking to her dad from prison, and he asks what she needs of him as a father, and she says the mother told so many lies that she needs to have some hard conversations to sit through the truth, and he says, I'm not trying to pick any bones about it. I should have checked on her, but it was hard to not believe Dee Dee. She had everybody fooled, doctors, authorities, everybody. And again, this is one of the ways that Dee Dee controlled things. She was able to sit here and just manipulate everybody. And again, on one level, it's like, wow, she really looks out for her. She takes her to the doctor. She does this. She does that. I can't do that. The dad has a job, at least during this time, where he's out on a boat for like 30 days at a time, right? So he's gone much of the time and doing this, and 30 days on, 30 days off, whatever it is. So he's talking about like, look, she, was doing a good job. I didn't have a reason to not believe her. Obviously, tides turn, things change. Now, Gypsy will find her Medicaid card at age 15, and she realizes she's 19 years old. This is the start of her running away for the first time. She recounts that night. She ran over to the dude's house that she met at the convention, and she says once she gets with him, she realizes the dude doesn't even have a place to stay. And her mom finds her, and her mom wakes up, because remember, the mother would keep Dee Dee would keep Gypsy. They slept in the same bed, so she could tell what was going on. So the mom wakes up. Well, Gypsy, her phone had fallen out of her bag when she left. So the mom is able to go read all these text messages and all this. She calls all these, acquaintances of this dude and Gypsy or whatever, finds out where she's at, and shows up at the house. Can you imagine? So Gypsy says when mom comes to the door, she's like, where are my pills and where's my money? Because Gypsy stole the pills and the money. Remember, she's addicted to these pills. So the mom's like, can we talk on the porch? Dee Dee says, if you come with me, I'll let you see him. And Gypsy believes her, so they go back with her. She's totally dependent on her, so she goes back. Gypsy confronts her about her age, and the mom has a forged copy of the birth certificate, and it shows her being younger, and Gypsy believes her. When they're in the house, Dee Dee chains Gypsy to the bed for 2 weeks, smashes her computer, phone, everything, right? So this is what I'm talking about, where she's like, I got away once, but here I'm back, and now it's even worse. And of course, Gypsy's thinking, I'm underage because, look, she has the birth certificate. She's very naive in many ways, right? I mean, there's this whole level of, again, at a certain point, it's like, why would you question your parent? But once she gets even older, obviously she does, right? So after the runaway, Dee Dee would actually start to hit her at times for punishment. Now, after being chained up, Gypsy says her mother would put a hex on her, a voodoo spell. She got a mason jar, hung a picture of her and Dan with some of Gypsy's menstrual blood in it, put it all in there, buries it in the yard, and tells her she will never find love. So Gypsy says that she thinks that this is true to this day, like it's this major insecurity with her, and because every time she gets close to somebody, they leave her, and she gets very emotional during her interview over this. Another family friend, a woman who worked at a movie theater who saw Gypsy and her mother on a very regular basis, sometimes a few times a week, said that she asked herself more than once, would I have believed Gypsy if she pulled me aside and was like, told me everything that was going on. She said Dee Dee had made everything so believable, saying that Gypsy was mentally challenged, so on and so forth, and she was like, I don't know if I would have believed Gypsy. And this is what I was talking about earlier, where people have the same thing of like, Dee Dee had this all lined up to where you would probably have questioned it, and been like, whatever. And I personally think in some situations, if Gypsy had gotten up and walked, she could explain that away, because, some of the stuff that Dee Dee did, she would keep it like if, or where she's healing, or where, here, there, obviously people would have had this serious question. But you can also see, like when Gypsy did the thing where she jumps off of the deck into the snow for this video they were doing, you can see her legs moving some. This is something that they're putting out there. So there's no doubt that she probably had this, but you could kind of play it off like she needs to be in the wheelchair, kind of a thing. Okay, then there's a story about Gypsy, that Gypsy recounts about her mom getting a gun, and she ends up taking the gun and shooting her mother like 10 times with it, y'all. It ends up being a BB gun. Now, they will ask the stepmother about this, and she's like, look, I don't know about that. There's some stuff that y'all, meaning the producers and TV people, know more than she does because of just things that they've been told and the way things have unfolded and whatnot with this docuseries. Then when Dee Dee went to go get treated for it, Dee Dee lied and said that they were robbed in like a parking lot somewhere. And the therapist will come on and talk about this and speak to how even in this scenario, it benefits both of them to lie, because this is the bonded by a lie. Dee Dee doesn't want to risk anything to lose whatever it is she gets out of the situation from her daughter, right? She doesn't want that to go away. This is like a mental thing, whatever, pleasure from the attention and all that. And then obviously the money and the free stuff. So to me, this accounts for why they both just kind of pandered to the lie. Okay, then she talks about going on a Christian dating site for free, like Christian dating for free or whatever. And that's where she meets Nick. I find that completely ironic. The guy who would end up taking her mother's life, she met on this Christian dating site. I mean, come on. So 2 weeks after meeting online, they make it Facebook official that they are a couple. They're in a relationship. Gypsy says that one of his exes reached out to her and warned her, but she was like, this is like a jaded ex. I'm not going to pay attention. And she's like, I wish I had. But the ex said he's violent, stay away from him, like he's not right. So Gypsy talks about the time that they set up in the movie theater for him to meet her mother, as if they were just strangers bumping into each other. Now, what it was is they were going to the movie, so he was going to just randomly be there and bump in, and the mom can meet him and see how it goes. Well, they're in a movie that's like a little girl's movie, and so that's the same movie that Nick's in, and it comes off as super creepy for this like single dude to be in there, turn around trying to get Gypsy's attention. Well, they were also going to use this opportunity for Nick to take her virginity. So at one point, Gypsy's like, can I go to the bathroom? The mom's like, yeah, well, Nick had already left or something like that. So Gypsy goes in there, they meet up in the handicap stall, and Nick is not able to perform, so it doesn't happen. Now, after they talk, because the mother, during this confrontation at the movie theater with him, is like, who is this weirdo? And she's like, look, it's obvious mom doesn't like you. What are we going to do? And this is the origins of the plan that ends up taking place, that we see what happened. Now, Nick also has another personality. It is a 500-year-old vampire by the name of Victor. And this is who is going to take the mother out. Okay, so just keep that in mind. And on that note, let's we need to go ahead and take a sip from the cup on that one, okay? Okay, Rosky, you okay back there? No vampires back there. So Gypsy Rose's half-sister speaks, and she says that she always felt like 10 years in prison was too long, but that she did deserve some jail time, but just not that long. She needed help, basically. So it refers back to, the story of where things are coming with Gypsy's life and her mom and Nick, and she doesn't want to lose Nick, and she's trying to figure out what to do. She feels trapped. Her mother is getting power of attorney, and she's realizing, I'm completely stuck under this woman. She's also realizing, I don't think I have cancer. All this is starting to come out. Like, Gypsy's finally being able to start waking up and be like, wait a second. This doesn't make sense. Now she's getting power of attorney. I'll have no control over myself whatsoever. Like, what do I do? Now, Gypsy says it was her plan to come up with a plan. It was her idea to come up with a plan to take her mother out. But Nick runs with it and talks about doing all this crazy stuff to the mom, right? And this is when the whole thing of Victor the vampire comes out. The vampire comes out and, he's going to be the one to take the life. Now, once they go back and forth about how to do it, they're like, should we use a gun? Should we use this? They settle on a knife and Gypsy steals one from Walmart. Now, Gypsy talks about what Nick wanted to do to the mother. He wanted her to suffer very badly. And he had all these fantasies about taking her out and then, what he was going to do after, which was going to be R-ing her and then dumping her off at a pig farm and letting the pigs eat the body. And he wanted Gypsy to be by his side when he did all of the acts. So, yeah. Gypsy said he had one fantasy that if they had a daughter, then when the daughter was age 13, he was going to take her virginity as well. And that's when, at this point, now this is like prior to, and Gypsy's like, I dumped him. I was like, what? And she said, but a few days later, he comes back and he gets in her good graces and he makes it up and says, that was a lie and whatever. She gets him back. Okay, the plan is hatched. So Gypsy has to steal money from her mother's safe to get a bus ticket for Nick to come to Missouri to take her out. And Gypsy said that she's never told anyone except for the attorneys this, but she made a home video where she walked through the house and showed Nick what the house looked like and the layout of it and everything and where everybody was. And she even points to the bed that her mother slept in and makes a stabbing motion after she points to the pillow. She says the reason she did this was because she was high all the time on pain pills and the side effects created a disconnection to the reality she said she was living in. So this is where we're going to get into the whole thing that like the internet's becoming divided on, about the case and like just people in general, because it's like, well, look, she knew enough to do A, B, and C. Couldn't she have reached out and done this? And this is a logical question. Even her half-sister is like, she needed to go to prison. Maybe not 10 years is a long time. She did something wrong. And I feel that same way too, where I'm like, yeah, she definitely did something wrong. Because there's probably a plethora of things that could have been done. On the same note, I also see like the level of abuse and psychological manipulation she was in. And the fact that it's like all these times that I have tried to reach out for help, I'm right back with my mother. So it will never end. And then you have this anxiety of, I'm in love, I want my guy, but she doesn't like him, and da-da-da. I see, again, the perfect storm brewing in all of this. Now, before we continue on, just heads up, I did have to stop recording. I got my hair cut today, so you might be like, Papa looks a little bit fancier, and that's all it was. I didn't get fancy on nobody. I just got cleaned up a little bit. Got the hooves done too. But let's continue on Gypsy. Gypsy says that the night that the M happened, she gave her mother a really big hug and held onto her. And her mother said, what's that for? I'm not dead yet. And it was all very ironic, she says. Gypsy and her mom then watch a movie. The mother falls asleep, and a couple of hours later, Nick is in Springfield. Remember, he took the bus and came over. He's there. He takes a cab over to the house. So he gets to the house and he tells her to get her butt in the bathroom, and then tells her as soon as he walks in the door, the bee is dead. Now remember that because that's what was on the Facebook post, and she'll talk about that. So Gypsy says she's in the bathroom. She covers her ears. She hears her mom wake up. She hears screaming and banging and a struggle. And then Gypsy says like it all went quiet for a moment. And then she uncovers her ears and everything's silent. And then her mom calls her name for help. And she's like, come help me. And Gypsy gets very emotional over this part. But then everything goes silent. And then Nick finally comes to the bathroom. He had cut his finger. And he basically tells Gypsy like, you have to clean the whole house up. And she says, he was supposed to R the mother afterwards, but she would not let him. So then she basically is like, has to agree to let him do that to her, as part of the payoff or whatever. So after he does this deed, she cleans the house. She said his eyes were on her the whole time. Like he watched her from room to room. So they leave, they get a hotel. Obviously, she's nervous about getting caught, she says. And she says, at this point, I'm getting high off pain medication. So she's in shock. She didn't think it really happened, but she's also kind of disconnected because of the drug. Now, we'll revisit this in a little bit, but I did have some thoughts on this because here is one thing. And actually, when I say revisit it, let's just go ahead and talk about it for a second. So there's this whole thing about, number one, in the confessions and whatnot, when Nick and her are separated, we'll get to that in a minute when they get caught. But what really went down? Who did as much stabbing as who says? Now, Gypsy's pain, medication addiction, and all this type of stuff, I have no doubt that if that part is 100% true, that there is this disconnectedness. Now, take that away or whatever, I think there would be a level of shock and disconnectedness, like, did this really happen? But this is one of those things where I'll just have to say it, I'm not 100% sure I'm buying what she's saying about that. I think that this could possibly be hammed up a little bit to make herself kind of like feel better about what took place, because it sounds incredibly traumatic, and I have no doubt she heard these things, but I think just wrapping in with the pain medication and making sure to say that, it's almost like a but look over here kind of a situation. Again, I'm not downing her or anything like that for that part. It is what it is, not the part about taking the life, but about, well, I was on pain medication, so kind of a thing. I mean, I get it, right? What she might be trying to do there, but again, I don't know. I'm not there, but that's just what it felt like to me watching the documentary. We'll return to the part about who did what stabbing after we get to them getting caught in just a second. So then she talks about them getting to the bus station. This is what they were going to do. They were going to leave. They were going to go to his family, his parents' house, whatever, his mom's house. So they get there and the tickets are messed up and they have to stay a couple of extra days. So they basically go back to the hotel. They're getting pizza. They're just hanging out. She's strung out on drugs. She's also talking about the fact that she stole $5,000. And basically, in her world, she was like, that was what we live off of for the rest of my life. Like, she had no concept, right? When you listen to how they're describing this, because there is this level of like, what were you going to do next? Kind of a thing. And for her, there's almost this level of, well, you were just trying to get out of this situation. Probably wouldn't have any clue what you do next because she wouldn't know what to do to begin with. Unfortunately, she has put her eggs in the basket of somebody who was not living in a situation like she did with her mother and stuff, but even there is just stuff going on where he had no concept of what to do next other than going back to kind of like just being a youthful type person with no cares. And in this kind of situation, you can't be that way. You got to start covering your tracks. So they get the bus back to Wisconsin. They go to his house, his mother, and they're basically like, look, she got kicked out of her home by her mom. She's going to stay with us. The mom is cool with this. Now, this is when Gypsy goes into that, I had stolen $5,000. We could live forever off of this. And she was like, this is one of the happiest times I ever was. I was finally free. But the only thing is, she says, is that once they're at Nick's house and she's like, oh, wait a minute, you're like living, in this hovel at your mother's house. And then he starts controlling everything she did, what she could wear, when she could sleep, what she could do, everything. And this is when she starts getting like, okay, so I just jumped from that to this. And earlier, remember when I was talking about there's just kind of being this expectation of people taking care of her? Well, again, that's kind of all she had ever known, right? She says this. So this is where this shows through in the documentary to me, where it's like almost this concept of here's this man, he's going to whisk me away. Remember, she's only watched these shows with like princesses and knights in shining armor. So there's this level where she probably thought this of him, but then the reality is much different. And it's basically like, well, I was already living like this. So she says in all this, she really starts questioning, should I have done this? What should I have done? Mom's body's back at the house. So she's like, you know what? This is when I was like, I want somebody to find her. So this is when she makes the infamous Facebook post. And she goes back to, she says, like, what could I do? And she's like, I'll write what Nick said in the very beginning when he walked in the house and said the bee is dead. So now she did follow it up when people are like, she got hacked. And, she followed up with another vile thing. And she was like, I wanted to get caught. I wanted to send alarm. Now, I did question with this. With her doing that, was that part of the, well, Nick will take the fall, I'll use his words, I'll make it look like him. And at one point she does say that she was aware basically that he would probably get in more trouble, but she truly had no concept that she could get in as much trouble as she did when doing this, because she almost probably looked at it like, it sounds like, well, he's the one who actually did it, so I'll basically just go home. So, of course, this Facebook ad, it leads to people freaking out, what's going on, and this leads the cops to the house where they find Dee Dee deceased violently, and they find Gypsy's chair, they find Gypsy's meds, all this stuff. Now, remember, everyone's thinking that Gypsy is this crippled little girl, like, barely hanging on to life. And the whole thing, why would someone break in and do this and take a crippled person with them? Like, you're on the run, like, what's going on? This is mega panic. Now, at this point, the thing changes. The docuseries switches gears a little bit. So just work with me here, because we're going from the night of the crime back to the father. So it says, for her parole hearing, her father was out at sea, so her stepmother, Christy, came and stood up and talked for her, as well as Gypsy speaking. And Gypsy said she was nervous because she had never spoken directly to people, judges, not the judge, but, in this situation. Her lawyers always talked for her. She says her stepmother said that she did tell the board, like, look, you know what? I don't approve of what Gypsy did. like at all, but I see why she did it, but I do not condone that whatsoever, which I think a lot of us can. It's basically what most people think, right? I mean, I'm the same way where I'm like, I can see where this might have led to that, because it sounds torturous and horrifying. However, I don't agree going this route, right? But again, I wasn't in her footsteps, walking in her shoes, I should say. Now, when the board apparently asked her about her sentence, Gypsy's like, this isn't a 10-year sentence. This is a lifetime thing. I have to live with these actions and these regrets and all of this for the rest of my life, which is true. Now, she says that what was interesting is when, they went to the parole board, asked her, they essentially didn't ask her about the crime. They asked her what life was like with her mother. And so she had to explain all of this, which and it is good for her because you could tell the direction they went of, okay, what was it like living with her? And I mean, you can hear it's horrifying, right? So she gets this, the docuseries, says like she leaves and she feels good about it, through phone calls. And like 5 or 6 days later, they come back and like, we granted you parole. You're going to get out December 28th, 2023, which obviously just happened. So now we're at episode 5. Almost there, everybody. Hang in there. So my notes say Gypsy is engaged. His name is Ryan. He says he first learned about her by watching her story, and he was like, wow, she's cute. And he says Tiger King was like really popular, and he had a friend that was like into that or whatever. His friend was going to write Tiger King, and he was like, you write Tiger King, I'll write Gypsy Rose. And she says she was really attracted to his humor. Now the narrative returns back to the scene of the crime and the aftermath. Now everyone knew them as this duo. Gypsy had all these illnesses, so they think that somebody who is very vulnerable has been kidnapped. Something really bad has happened to her. Gypsy says the next morning they wake up, and basically that's when the SWAT team is breaking into the house where Nick was. So we switch back to, at Nick's house here. So they hide in the closet trying to decide what to say. And there's basically like a mini standoff, the police say, because essentially what it was them being upstairs for 20 minutes and not coming down. So they tell the SWAT that she was kicked out and that he came and got her and brought her home. That's what they're going to say. Now, of course, they are seeing her walking around, which completely throws them off. Remember, they're expecting this totally different scenario. So everybody's getting bamboozled. Like, what? She's walking? So at the same time, media people who have known this family are like, yeah, what? The girl walks? Like, this has been a scam? I mean, can you imagine? So the cop starts to be like, look, this is what happened. And Gypsy starts to be like, wait a second, stop. Are you serious? And the cop's like, girl, before you say one more word, okay? Before you say one more word. The cop even had one of these right here. He drank us from the cuppeth, and he was like, we already know, okay? We just need to know what your involvement was, okay? Like, we ain't trying to talk about, oh, mom's dead? Shocker. No. Which I liked how just that was. Now, in this, she says, and this is very interesting, before she gets ready to talk, she's like, before I even could lie, and she's like, and I could tell a million lies and not feel 1 ounce of like guilt over it or something. And this is very interesting because I think that in this dynamic that's going on now where we're seeing this kind of meltdown of how people feel about Gypsy and whatnot, to hear her just say like, oh yeah, I can basically just lie, like it doesn't affect me at all. I'm curious to know if after all these years and everything, because we'll hear from Ryan and towards the end here in a minute, where she starts to lie about some things to him in their relationship or omit truths, and she'll come clean with those. So it makes you wonder, is this something that she'll be able to overcome, to work through and whatnot moving forward? Now, at one point when the cop is talking to her, she's like, well, Nick and my mom didn't get along very well, that's all I know. There is a dynamic, I'm sorry, where it seems like she's trying to pin this on Nick. Okay, like the whole thing of using his words on Facebook, well, mom and Nick didn't get along, the whole dynamic just seems off. Now, another scene shows Nick saying how many times he stabbed her, which is 4 times, and then 5 including something on her neck. Now, this is an aspect that was brought up in regards to it being said that Dee Dee had 17 stab wounds. So this is what I've seen a lot of content on and a lot of people honing in on, is this dynamic right here. And in future videos of this, we'll focus more in on this, but this is just kind of an overview of things. So here's the thing. It's the whole theory of Dee Dee was stabbed multiple times, but Nick's over here talking about I stabbed her maybe 5 times. So then it's, okay, so where'd the rest of them come from? Well, obviously, people are making the connection that it was Gypsy and she's lying and he's protecting her because he's in love with her. This, again, is one of those scenarios where we get the gist of what happened. We basically can tell, right? They weren't hard to find and whatever. However, the only people that will ever truly know 100% what went down is Gypsy and Nick and Dee Dee, depending on how long she lived. Because if Gypsy did go back in there and stab her mom a bunch of times and she was still alive after 4 or 5 times, then she knows, right? And if she was deceased and Gypsy, or unconscious, and Gypsy went in there and just stabbed her out of rage, Dee Dee wouldn't know, but Nick and Gypsy obviously would. So that's what I'm talking about. So there's another scene that shows detectives interviewing Nick, and they're like, did she know what you were going to do to her mother, talking about Gypsy? And he's like, honestly, she asked me to do it. So then the narrative switches back to her relationship with Ryan. Ryan's the guy she's married to. And he says that they communicated for a while, and then it turned out she actually had a boyfriend while she was talking to him, but he took that as a compliment, like almost like, well, you're with him, but you're coming to me, you're thinking of talking to me. Now, Gypsy follows up with him later and was like, what's up? I want to be with you. And soon after, Nick proposed to her. So this is where they talked, and he came to visit, and it was very, and then it quickly turns into, a relationship blossoms, basically. Now, one thing to keep in mind with this is to keep this in mind, and I'll go ahead and just talk about it now because it'll come back up in a minute. So him talking about, well, I started talking to her, but she had this boyfriend, and fast forward, before they get married, and she comes clean to him about, I've been talking to my ex and this and that and the other, and he's understandably like, girl, we're getting married in 10 days. I'm glad you told me, but there was drama with it. This is some of the stuff that I'm talking about where, this thing with her of like, no one loves me, nobody wants me, that kind of thing. So, and I wonder now, being in the free world, if this will be an issue for her, because now she's completely free, right? The world is at her fingertips, literally. She's on a damn world tour, basically. Now, Ryan did say that his mother was like, why are you dating Gypsy Rose? Can you imagine? I'm not dissing her for this, but just think of the enormity of it. If you're like calling your parents up and you're like, well, yeah, I met me a real sweet young lady, real ladylike. And they're like, oh, who is it, sweetie? Tell me about her. Is she local? Does she go to your church? And you're like, well, she goes to church, but only on Sundays in cell block 8. You know what I'm saying? You're like, not only is it she's incarcerated right now, but on top of it, it's Gypsy down Rose. It's like, my God. Like this girl who everybody knows her name, right? The infamy is just like astounding. So her mother had to be like, okay, I need details. Now the narrative switches to the court appearance, her first court appearance, and everybody's talking about the shock of these images of seeing her walk out of court the first time. We touched on this a minute ago. And what can you say? And you could tell looking at her, and she even says this, she was so scared. She was so in over her head. And again, it's not that it's right, wrong, and different, anything like that. I get why she was there, right? She put herself there. She assisted with her taking her mother out. And no matter what I might think, it's still, it's like, whoa, right? But just to see how frightened she was, I was like, oh my God. I cannot imagine having lived through everything she did, and your next train stop is, bam, here you are going to court. And all media on you. Whoa. Now, Gypsy and Ryan were going to get married in secret, but decided not to. There was this dynamic of how they're planning the wedding, because remember also, and a lot of us, we talked about this case before when the headlines were coming out, and her family will say throughout this, like, do you have to get married? You know what I'm saying? Like, don't you need to get out first and do this or do that? But one thing that Gypsy does mention is that she's like, look, when you get paroled out, you have to go to family. And she's not married to this dude, and she's wanted to be with him. So it's this predicament that's kind of forcing a lot of things to happen that she might not have done had that been different. So there's a few bullet points here about Ryan. He's a 6th grade social studies teacher. He helps raise his nephew with his mother. Ryan says that she saved him as much as he saved her. This is going back now, kind of reverting back to Dee Dee and Gypsy and the night of the crime, and then finding out all this stuff. So apparently their house is very messy. Dee Dee was a bit of a hoarder, but a detective said the only real organized place was the medicine cabinet. And they do show pictures of this, and it is very, but there's tons of it. It's kind of shocking to see all the stuff that she had. Gypsy said she was very scared about the sentence she was going to get, and she spent a lot of time figuring out how old she would be when she got out of prison. And then she says one day she had an attorney visit, and it was her attorney, obviously, and the attorney's like, look, the state agreed to a deal. They're going to drop it down to 2nd degree M, and they're going to give you the bottom of the sentencing guidelines, like the least thing. Now, he was like, it's 10 years. And she was like, yes. She said, I said yes, like it was a proposal. And again, in these cases like this, she's very lucky she jumped on that, because like her lawyer said, if we go to trial, we're going to lose and you're going to spend the rest of your life in prison. And very true. She was thinking in her mind 20, 30, 40, 50. So when somebody comes to you for 10 years, You can try and parole out after like 7, 8 or whatever. I mean, come on, right? You'd be an idiot not to take it. So she did the right thing in this. And now my notes say this about her thoughts on that. And it says, even Gypsy says she thinks it would have been a real big mess if they had just let her out of prison. She didn't do any time kind of a thing. She doesn't think she would have had the mental stability to have gone from one situation to the next without any time to sort things out. And again, that's basically what prison was. If ever there was a case where it's like, oh my gosh, here's somebody who definitely needed this buffer zone of rehabilitation, I mean, here you go, right? You know, that's what she needed. And that's what most people say and tend to think, is it's like she needs help something, right? Yeah, I mean, there's this whole window here of you've gone from this extreme abusive prison you're in, you know, to this other thing, this middle of the ground, to learn basic things, skills and whatnot. If you're going to prison and on your first day, you're like, this is fun. I kind of like it here. Like, I mean, hey, what's going on, everybody? And trust me, you need to be there to sort things out for a minute, okay? Because it's just tells us everything we need to know. Now, she does mention that in 2019, she gets a letter from Nick basically saying that he's still in love with her and doesn't regret what he did. And you know, Gypsy's like, yeah, thanks, but no, you know, we need to kind of not do this. Now, Gypsy said she thinks Ryan has concerns that when she gets out of prison, she will, you know, will she be loyal to him? Well, obviously, we're getting ready to find out there's reasons for those concerns, even before you get to the normal reasons. Because here's one thing. If you've watched things like Love After Lockup, which if you haven't and you like good trashy reality TV, immediately go to season 1 right now, turn this damn video off, go there and start watching it, okay? You will thank me later, okay? It's an insight into how these situations work. And here's the thing, when they're incarcerated, they're very vulnerable, right? The inmate. Even though I know like a lot of the inmates prey on people on the outside, it goes both ways. So, yeah, but they're also very, you know, they're just vulnerable. They're not in the outside world. And it creates this very odd bubble of a relationship. Well, when you get out, and it's like, you know, you can do anything. Now you don't have to be stuck with this person who is doing everything for you. It can be an eye-opener for both parties. And then you see how each other interacts in the world, and especially for Gypsy, who knows she's coming out to fame, right? Books, TV, all this crazy stuff. I mean, it's a lot. Okay, so now we're on episode 6. She said she feels guilty because she feels undeserving of happiness. And these are some interesting insights that she lets us in during this documentary. Now, a psychologist she's talking to basically says he feels like they don't have any real world experience in the relationship, so he's not sure if it will last. I mean, this is what I was talking about. I mean, this is just how these go, right? Especially Gypsy not having been out in the real free world at all. It's, you know, a lot. So Gypsy admits that she has a very hard time letting go of her ex-fiance. They show a phone call where she tells Ryan that she had a dream about this ex. In the dream, she left Ryan for him, and he's like, I don't know what to say. She admits to talking to him 3 weeks ago, and Ryan gets pissed and calls her a liar for lying to him. Ryan's like, wasn't I just there 3 weeks ago? You know, and you said you hadn't talked to him in forever. And this is the thing where it's like, this is, you know, not good, okay? Now there's another phone call and that Gypsy calls him back. He sounds like, you know, you sound like you're getting very emotional. Why don't you call Ken, work it out, see, you know, get back with him? He's like using this reverse psychology thing. She's like, no, I'll never be the blonde bimbo that he wants to be. And I found this part very interesting because I'm going to be honest, the vibe that I got from it was almost like, oh, if she could, she would. You know what I'm saying? Like, it was kind of the general energy that I got. You know, she's sitting here like, you know, yeah, have these feelings for him. I talked to him. She's kind of going behind the back and whatnot. So again, I'm very curious to see about this relationship of hers. Of course, you don't want people's stuff to end, you know what I'm saying? But it's a whole bunch to take on. And it'll be interesting to see what happens with it now that she's out doing her own thing and she's not completely dependent on him, because in a sense, that was going to be her lifeline while she was incarcerated, was, you know, the men she was seeing. And the Ken dude just kind of bolted when the going got tough, but you can tell that there's still something there. Now they go back to the stepmother and she says, you know, we told Gypsy we support you, but just don't marry him. Take your time first, get to know him first. And again, we talked about this a moment ago. I totally agree. Now, Gypsy's half-sister who comes into play in this, which I don't know if I just didn't remember, but I didn't know she had a half-sister till this. And I was like, oh wow, another interesting dynamic. So her half-sister says she doesn't know what it's like to live in the real world, meaning Gypsy. She doesn't know what, you know, it's like to have a man, you know, in the real world, to love a man, to live with a man. Ryan. She's worried about her too in this whole situation. So Ryan has planned to meet the half-sister Mia of Gypsy's, and she says she's a hard-to-please lady. She's like 21 at this time. They question him from basic stuff that anybody would. They fear that he's going to bolt like the ex Ken did when the going gets tough. And of course he's like, no, I'm not going to do that. We have something special. We have this, we have that. The family members have genuine concerns. And again, there's an added component because there's a monetary value attached to her at this point. Her name, infamy, this type thing. And unfortunately, we live in a day and age where people, they can get famous off that. So you never really know somebody's true intentions. Now, he says that he was asked to resign from his last teaching position at his Christian organization because they found out about his relationship with Gypsy. So the wedding part comes up. He's very nervous. They're just doing a very simple thing at this point. They'll do the wedding and the dress and all that later. So they get married. The wedding day arrives, but cameras can't go in. And afterward, Ryan is glowing, y'all. There is something very just naive and cute about how happy he is. And Gypsy is as well. But again, they won't let us see in there. Now, 2 to 3 months go by after the wedding, and they get into an argument about another ex of hers that she is in contact with, but not Ken. And they get in this big argument, and they basically, is suggested by the stepmother to do an annulment. Here's the thing during this. He's like, well, she called me up and said, I consider us separated now. And she's like, I didn't wear my ring for 2 weeks. So the whole thing with the argument is he starts off by saying, 2 to 3 months, the honeymoon period wore off. Well, I'm thinking this. I'm like, what's changed? What I'm saying? What has changed? Nothing. There's nothing changed. How did you have a honeymoon period? You know what I mean? You haven't even kissed her beyond a peck in the lips. So I thought it was weird that he said that because I'm like, oh, dude, you're doing this while it's incarcerated? Literally nothing's changed other than a legal marriage. Unless the attitude has changed. Because it makes you wonder, how some people might be like, well, we're married now, and my woman or my man's not going to be saying, you know what I mean? The attitude can change on a person once they get the ring on the finger. I don't know other than that, but I got a little chuckle out of that. But anyways, an annulment's looked into, and essentially he goes there and he's like, I need to hear from her in person. Seriously, are we doing this? You want to leave me? And she's like, no, I'm still in love with you. They make up and they go on their way. So Gypsy's getting ready to get out. It's leaving time. So the family rents a big house to take her, when she gets out. Everyone gets there. Ryan goes into town to pick her up. Now remember, this doesn't happen till 3:30 in the morning. So he drives in and, they're like, no cameras, no camera crew, none of this, none of that. They get her, they bring her home. They open these presents. It's all this wonderful reunion. And then the probation officer calls and he's basically like, you need to leave the state and get back to Louisiana. And it's very upsetting. And she's on the phone, her lawyer's on the phone, all this stuff. And they're like, well, look, what about this? What about that? Now, side note, while this is going on, this was not in the documentary, but Gypsy had been talking about, we're going to go, I think it was a Chiefs game. I don't know what game it was, but basically she's talking about, I want to meet Taylor Swift. And everybody's like, conspiracy theory. Oh, Taylor Swift pulled some, big guns to get basically Gypsy out of the state. I'm like, I don't think that really happened. I think that the probation officer, that's just how it goes. You have to check in. And it's like, no, girl, we don't care that you're Gypsy Rose. Get your butt here. You ain't getting no special treatment. Now, do I think it's crappy? Yes. She's with her family. They're reunited. They're doing all this stuff. So I understand that. But then there's also the security risk of things going on. But it's very upsetting. And she's trying to figure out okay, I guess we have to hop in the car and go and leave. Now, that's all the notes that I put on there. And again, it just wraps up. And basically now it's real time. She's out. We've kind of seen this play out. So I want to just touch on a couple of things for our little afterthoughts. Again, was it an amazing docuseries? It was good. It was worth watching. I ripped through the whole thing in one day. Let's put that, 2 days. I watched 2 episodes one day, then 4 the next. So it was very interesting in the context, like I said in the beginning, to hear Gypsy talk the whole time. Do I think that we're 100% getting the truth of what went down that night? No, I do not. I think we're getting some version of it. I think that Nick, it definitely has a lot of issues. I think that he, and I probably said this earlier, but I'll say it again. I think one reason why he got the draconian sentence and she didn't is because he comes off like he got a twisted pleasure out of this. There was something more there for him about what they did to the mother, whereas it was not that way with Gypsy. There didn't seem to be this perverse stuff along with it. Now, it's my understanding that, he does have some stuff going on and whatnot. It will be very interesting to see what happens with his case now that she is out. If he's able to get the sentence reduced or who knows what. Here's, a couple of other thoughts. Again, let's fast forward to she's out, she's doing her thing. I'm ready to see some substance from Gypsy. Now, I understand she was out promoting the series and her book, and whoever her management is or whatever they're doing, they're kind of saying boom, boom, boom. Okay, we all know because we've seen the emergence of social media where she kind of has, but probably not like we have, right? Because at one point she's like, oh, we used to be able to make calls from our iPads and da-da-da-da. So, they have access to stuff, but probably not in the context that we did. So what I'm getting at is, the way social media here works is people build somebody up and then they rip them down. And so right now, Gypsy's boom, 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 boom. And already people are starting to be like, well, wait a minute, what about this? And she did this, and people are getting a certain way about certain things. Again, this is the internet. Everybody picks a side and, debates on it, whatever. It's what makes the world go round. My fear is that this will happen to her. There will be this, and now this happened, and we're going to rip her apart, cancel Gypsy, and all this kind of stuff in the context of, can she emotionally handle that? The things that I was seeing go on with like her talking behind Ryan's back to an ex and then coming forth and then breaking up over this. I mean, again, this is someone who's having to basically emotionally restart their life and live it over. Now, clearly she was able to do this incarcerated, but like getting out and you're married and instant fame. Okay, I can't imagine what that weight would be like on my shoulders. Okay. So that part right there, I'm just like, oh, there's no way. Do I get a nefarious vibe from Ryan? No. Gypsy's a pretty girl. She has this aura about her. You can just see this in her talking. I can see why Ryan, was drawn, or why men would be like, oh, who is this young lady? I can see that. Time will tell with a relationship. Again, if you've watched Love After Lockup or seen this, these things usually don't end well, and they don't have that kind of fame and notoriety attached to them. So one thing I saw Gypsy do recently is, and what I mean recently is like maybe even yesterday or whatever, on her TikTok or Insta or one of those, she did a post and she was basically saying, you know what, I've been doing my promotion for the book and all that. Now everything's winding down, and I want to get back to why I'm here on social media, and that's speaking out about Munchausen by proxy, however you say it. And for me, I was like, this is what I want to see. I want to scratch beneath that surface because this is somebody with a story to tell, not just what happened. I get she has to talk about that, but I'm like, tell me what lessons you've learned from this as a human being, not as an offender, not as a victim, not as this, but as a human being. I want to hear the human experience, and then specifically with this, because she essentially is like the poster child for this. When you say this, disorder, Gypsy Rose comes to, most everybody's mind, right? It's just what's been made famous by that. So again, the way she's speaking out and, advocating like, here's things to look for, I could really see her doing good with this and possibly even lobbying for, and I don't know what kind of laws you could change or whatever, but I could see her having a voice in that and using her experience to help another person or to enlighten people to be able to say, hey, wait a minute, see something, say something, this ain't right, kind of a thing. And even doctors and whatnot. I mean, for God's sakes, her mother was able to scheme all these doctors and people. So that's it. I know this was a very long video. Thank you for still watching if you are. What I want to do with this is, if this is something y'all want to keep talking about, you're interested in, let me know, because I want to visit other aspects of it. Now I want to go back and look at those interviews or the police recordings with Nick, and I want to look at some of her interviews that she's done on like her little world tour and kind of see what she's saying there and get the energy of that and just kind of plot through it that way, and then revisit some aspects of the case, because again, like I said, overall, I don't think we're getting 100% the truth, and right, wrong, or indifferent, I don't know. Maybe we can't, who knows, right? But I don't think we're 100% getting the truth. I think only Nick and her will ever know what truly happened in that house. And I'm not trying to say that she did this or that, but there's something missing. And what that could be, I don't know, right? It could just be a very traumatized person that's, hasn't dealt with all that yet. So I don't know. Anyways, let me know if you watched it. Let me know what parts stuck out to you, of any of the things I was hitting on that I was like, or whatever. Let me know in the comment section. So that's it. I greatly appreciate it. Now, y'all, look, usually I ask at this point in the video, I'll turn and Roscoe will say something like, hey, ask him to drop some sofas. He started doing his little huffing and puffing earlier, so I had to go take him out to be with the other doggies. But he is telepathically talking from the other room, and he's saying, Dad, the sofas! We need the sofas! In the comment section, like usual. Thank you. And until me and Roscoe telepathically get ourselves down there to the comment section, we'll see y'all soon.